Back in 2019, I reviewed the Creative Stage 2.1 and I found it to be one of the best budget soundbars that money could buy. Now in 2021, I'm presented with the Stage V2 2.1. Now in this review, I'll be comparing it to its predecessor and seeing if the extra money is worth your, well, hard-earned cash, and furthermore, if this is still one of the best budget soundbars that money can buy. Now if you're interested in purchasing it, the locally link in the description below will take you to your localized Amazon store. And if you're interested in keeping up with my shenanigans, do check me out on social media. The links will be down in the description below or indeed on your screen right now, be it on Twitter or Instagram. I'd very much appreciate a follow. And if you're interested in all electric or hybrid news or reviews, do check out Totally EV. Your support would be equally appreciated. So kicking things off, let's talk about the build quality and design. As I mentioned, there's a few different design characteristic changes from its predecessor. Now, be it have you tried its predecessor before or not, I will say that the Stage V2 2.1 does look pretty nice. Although I'm not too much of a fan of kind of like the bolted look that stretches at the top of the soundbar, but nevertheless that is probably not going to be that much important, be it if you're going to be placing it under a television or indeed in front, as I am doing in my case, in front of a cabinet. Now the speaker grille is metal all the way at the front, and around the sides and underneath you've got kind of like a glossy look, and you've got rubber feet as well which prevent it from sliding around. There's also wall mount, so if you do want to wall mount it you can do so, and that's a nice inclusion. Now continuing with the theme of design, Creative have retained the LCD LED indicator that's found at the middle of the soundbar. Now while this won't bode much of a problem for a lot of people, it's just worth bearing in mind that you can't disable the LED indicator. Truthfully, why would you? Because you want to know the input source, or indeed when you're adjusting the volume you want to see an actual visual indicator of that, and in this respect I'm pleased that Creative have retained this and also implemented it in the V2. Now moving on, we've got connectivity, and here it's nice to see that Creative have not only included wireless but also wired connectivity options. First off, in terms of wired, you've got a optical input which is really used for older generation televisions, and if you've got a newer generation television which has HDMI ARC, that's the mode I would very much suggest you to use. In my case, that is what I'm connected up to my Samsung TV. Moving on from there, you've actually got USB connectivity. Now this is not a novelty, but it's nice to see USB Type-C connectivity on the soundbar, and furthermore this will integrate with either new generation consoles or indeed your computer, so you can use this as an external speaker straight from your console or to your computer, which is a nice touch which is done by the manufacturer. Moving on from there, we've also got wireless connectivity, and here, unlike some of its competitors, you don't have Wi-Fi, but truthfully you're not really going to need it because you've got Bluetooth connectivity. Now Bluetooth is limited to the lowest quality SBC codec only. That is pretty much expected for a budget soundbar, and truthfully a lot more expensive soundbars limit to the SBC codec. So here I would limit your usage over wireless to really if you want to use it as a party speaker, but if you want any sort of serious listening or you really want to enjoy the best of the soundbar's qualities, then I would highly suggest using a wired connection such as HDMI ARC. Now moving on, we've got the remote control, and as you can see over here it's pretty sleek and stylish, and I think Creative have not only updated it but have also made it look a little bit more premium. Now at the top you've got a power on and off, and then you've got a mute button, so if you were to mute it, it will respond by flashing, as you can see over there potentially in the background. Then you've got the inputs, which are pretty much comprehensive. If you go on the Bluetooth menu, again it will start flashing blue if you haven't paired before, but if you have paired to a device before, then it will remain on a constant blue. In my case I use it on HDMI ARC. And then you've got the volume up and down, you've got play and pause and previous and skip buttons, which is quite nice to see, specifically for media controls given over the Bluetooth connectivity. And then you've got the surround mode, which you can enable or disable. You've also got the dialogue, which you can enable or disable, reset them as well, and you can go plus and minus on the bass and treble. When you hit the bass button, it will show up as a bass, a BA, and TR on the soundbar, so worth bearing that in mind. And of course we get onto the most important part, the sound quality. Now to give you an indication of how the soundbar performs, I'm going to give you a small sound demo. Do pay attention for the little annotations on the video, which will give you an indication as to how the soundbar is configured. In other words, in what mode it's playing, be it dialogue mode or surround or completely off.
You're soared high, then learn how to fly. It's the only way I know how to play this game. game to success. I'm not quite, and now I'm falling, falling, falling 1,000 miles ahead. I'm living in my young mind, but it's glowing. I'm always hoping.
Now with the sound demo out of the way, let's get on to my subjective opinion. And before doing so, if you did like the song, by the way, it'll be down in the description below. It's from my close friend called Priya. Her song name is called Falling. Do show her some love and appreciation. And of course, encourage her to do some more music, as I always do so, pretty much on a kind of weekly, monthly basis. Now let's get on to the overall sound frequencies of the Stage V2. And let's start off with the sub-bass tones. Now in terms of sub-bass, this has got an actual dedicated subwoofer. Now while the subwoofer won't compete with more expensive solutions out there, it is, suffice to say, going to be a much better experience over your TV speakers. No matter what TV you've got, and no matter how expensive or flagship or budget, they're not going to be able to reproduce those low-end tones purely because they don't have the chamber to do that in. And in this respect, the Stage V2 has a dedicated subwoofer, and even in comparison to more expensive all-in-one soundbar solutions, the dedicated subwoofer does deliver those low-end tones, which comes to fruition when you're listening to music or indeed watching movies, such as, let's say, Transformers with explosions going around everywhere. That subwoofer is going to deliver those low-end tones. Now don't get me wrong, as I said, it's not going to compete with more expensive solutions, but it's great to see it, and at this price range, it's definite a plus point and one that should be definitely applauded. Moving past the sub-bass rumble, we've got the mid-bass. Now here the mid-bass, again, very much like as I was saying before, it's not going to really compete with more expensive subwoofers or indeed ones which have more drivers that are comprised within the soundbar itself. Nevertheless, the mid-bass does deliver a pretty punchy sound and will leave you excited, to say the least. Of course, you could do with a little bit more control in the mid-bass tones and a little bit more emphasis without it leaking into the mid-range, but again, at this price point, it's very impressive to see how the Creative deals with it. And actually, in my room's acoustics, I reduced the bass by 1 notch, in other words, left it to -1, in order to get a little bit more from the mid-range. Speaking of which, the mid-range is where Creative has really put a lot of effort in, and I must say the mid-range is much bettered over the V1. In comparison to other soundbars as well on the market, the Creative Stage V2 actually does a phenomenal job in the mid-range department. Now, in order to get a little bit more from the mid-range, I would suggest you to add +1 to the treble adjustment. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on your room's acoustics, but in my case I found that treble +1 resulted in a little bit of a better mid-range reproduction. And with the bass a little bit lowered, it meant that you had vocals coming out to the foreground. And here I was very impressed to see, say the least, that how vocals were coming across when I was watching news or, let's say, football commentary, or indeed listening to music or watching movies. Dialogue comes out in front and isn't really pushed back and too recessed. Yes, it will sound recessed in comparison to more expensive solutions, but in comparison to what else you can find in the market right now at the price point, I would say this is pretty much class leading in terms of its performance. And it's something that I wouldn't have really said about its predecessor, but at this stage, yes, pun intended, the V2 does an incredible job in terms of its mid-range and really did leave me a little bit jaw-dropped as to what you can actually get at this price. Now, as for the highs, they extend really well and provide you that kind of nice crystal sound at the top end without sounding too sibilant or harsh. It would have been nice to see a separation between the mid and high frequencies on the EQ mode, but it's okay to say the least, and I have no complaints here in the treble department. Now moving on, we've got the Soundstage, and here this was very much fitting with its name. The Stage V2 really adds an extra stage to the dimension in comparison to its predecessor. This really comes into effect when you hit the surround mode button, EQ, on the remote control. Here sound will be perceivably coming from a little bit of, well, not say all directions, but it's a little bit more, well, wider sounding. And in this respect, in my case, despite it having some adverse effects on the overall mid-bass and lower mid tones, I felt that the surround mode actually did result in a bettered viewing experience, or indeed listening experience, when I was using the soundbar. The surround mode essentially means that it boosts out the kind of mid-range or the side-firing tones and gives you more of a sense of a, well, surround sound experience. Now again, it's not going to compete with more expensive solutions out there, and the fact that it lacks Dolby Digital support means that you're not going to really benefit when you're watching HD content versus non-HD content. In my case, I had to use the PCM input via HDMI ARC, and this was somewhat of a kind of flaw. But other than that, the surround sound effect does give you a better experience, and at this price range again, is very impressive to say the least, and in comparison to the Stage V1 is far superior in this domain. What I will also say is that the instrument separation is done really well, despite it having low number of drivers positioned inside the small size soundbar. It does a phenomenal job at instrument separation and the overall width that you get, as I said before, specifically with the surround sound mode enabled. The depth could have been improved, but I think that's due to the size of the soundbar itself, and furthermore the lack of upward and sideward firing speakers, which would have augmented the overall sound experience that you get from the Stage V2. And this all leads me on to my verdict. Now, the V1 came out at around £85, $85, and now at the time of making this video, the V1 is around £10, $10 less expensive. Now the V2 is more expensive at around £100 or $100, but it is very much worth the extra investment. Not only you got USB Type-C input, but you've also got the bettered mid-range and the surround sound effects, which will truthfully be a big deal for a lot of people out there. Now, for those people who have already got the Stage V1, I don't think it's worth you spending extra money and potentially selling your old soundbar and getting the V2. However, for people coming to a budget soundbar for the first time, I definitely think you should spend the extra money and get the V2 over its V1 predecessor. Of course, prices might fluctuate, so do ask me down in the comments below if you want some opinions in this respect. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that the best budget soundbar that was with the V1 has now just been bettered with the V2, and it's essentially the best budget soundbar you can buy at this moment in time. So as a result, this soundbar gets my Best Buy award. It's pretty much easy to see why. But if you've got any questions, ask me down in the comment section below, and of course do let me know what you make of the Creative Stage V2 2.1 soundbar, be it for a mouthful or not. And if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to see more, and of course favourite and share, as it'll always help the channel grow. Alright, I've been Totally Dubbed, take care and bye bye.